formed, not finished. This 4-week series that we began last week is us looking at the way the scriptures are unfolding at this point in St. Matthew's Gospel. And for 3 of the 4 weeks, we directly see St. Peter, but he's implicitly there this week. I was reading a book some time ago called In Her Own Words by Sister Lucy, one of the visionaries from Fatima. She had lived a long time after the other two and decided to make her own little memoirs available to everybody. So this was telling the stories of what life was like at the time of the apparitions in Fatima. Now, as you could probably guess, they lived in peasant-style communities because there wasn't, the government was kind of oppressive and there wasn't a lot of money to go around. One of the things that she describes in her memoirs is what family life was like at the time. And it's very different, very foreign from anything that we would know today. The family actually ate meals together. The family actually went into the living room after the meals and did things together. They actually talked to each other. They spent time with each other. They prayed with each other. The children played with each other. All the cousins in the area knew each other. When they had things to do, they went out and did them together. The children helped keep the farm and take care of the animals. Very different than anything we would know today. But that really was very common for most of history. When you think about most of history, families were all you had. I mean, that was it. Your family life, your home, that was it. You might have, done some school, maybe get a job somewhere. That did happen. But for the most part, you were still very close to your family, especially as children. The faith formation was taking place in the home. It wasn't until the Second Vatican Council that we started using the expression domestic church. But that was the domestic church. They didn't have to say it out loud because that's what it was. What changed? Now, I want some of you to think about it. Some of you may remember a time when they first invented the radio. Probably not too many because it goes back way too far now. But when the radio first came out and people started putting these big things in their living room, now story time on the radio became what the family started to do. But the family still did it together. Then that next thing came along, that miraculous thing that suddenly appeared in living rooms everywhere, the television. And I remember as a kid, that's when my memories started kicking in, was the television. This big thing, we had this big thing with a high fidelity radio in it and a phonograph. That was big news. But not only that, it had this screen next to it that was about like this size. It was not very big at all. But I remember the day when we got our first color television. That was a big thing in the family. Gilligan's Island was moving into color, and we were going to be able to see it in living color. It was a big thing. Oh, it was a big thing. And the family, we would gather around, and it would take it like 2 minutes, 3 minutes to warm up, and so you could see something, and you still had the scrolling pictures and all those things. But this was big for our family. We started paying attention to this glowing box in our living room together, but barely talking to one another. There was no real interaction with us. And what St. Lucia is going to be, but Sister Lucia, when she was talking about it, her family was forming one another, praying with one another. The faith was still very rich in their domestic church. But in my family, that kind of got thrown out the window because nothing that we were watching on that glowing box was religious. There were some movies that came out in, like the 40s and the 50s that had religious themes, but by the 60s and 70s, a lot of that was getting pushed aside, and none of the media was doing anything Catholic. That has profoundly changed the worldview of everybody, because what we're exposed to the most is what becomes the most important to us. And so researchers have documented it again and again. People who watch a lot of television, especially certain kinds of things, whether it be the news or dramas or westerns, it begins to have an impact on you. And so one of the researchers, his name was Albert Bandura, came up with a thing that people who watched news a lot experience what he calls the mean world syndrome. And you can tell people who watch a lot of news when you meet them because everything in the world is wrong. Everything is terrible. I can't believe that this world is like, all right, calm down a little bit. But this, my dear brothers and sisters, is what we're going up against. Today's gospel might be really hard for some of you. It really seems like Jesus is just having a bad day, doesn't it? He wasn't. Make no mistake, what he did was not sinful. He was not being nasty to this woman. What we have to do as Catholics, and I said this last week, we have to read the Gospels in context. And unfortunately on Sundays, sometimes we skip large sections. And so my recommendation last week, of course, was to read chapters 14, 15, and 16 over the course of these weeks, so you're getting it all. What happened right before this tells you a lot about what's happening in it. What happened right before this is Jesus had one of those exchanges with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. One of those ones that I think is very important. He actually called them blind guides leading the blind. And he accuses them of making their own traditions and imposing those human traditions on the people rather than understanding God's traditions. They were basically the ones of their time that set the tone. And so people got a heavy dose of what these Pharisees and Sadducees were saying, and they were told again and again. Things like the thing that Jesus says to them, like taking your money and giving it all to God, giving it to the temple, giving it to the Pharisees, which, by the way, isn't such a bad thing. All right, maybe we have to understand. But what he's saying is, you're taking it from your parents, so your parents have nothing to live on, and that's going against the fourth commandment. He doesn't say it quite that way, but that was the point of the whole exchange. Jesus just has this exchange, and his disciples are trying to figure out, Lord, what is it I'm supposed to understand from this? And he says, it's not what goes into one, like this whole thing of washing your hands, and your hands have to be clean so you can eat, so you don't defile yourself. It's not what goes into you that defiles you, it's what comes out of you. It's what's in your heart. What are you really thinking? These traditions that these Pharisees and Sadducees have been giving you have been making you cruel to others without you even thinking about it. See, people look at this, Jesus sees this Canaanite woman specifically saying to her, you're such a terrible person, get out of my midst. He did not do that. I want to be clear about this. He did not do that. First off, at the end of the passage where Jesus is talking with his disciples right before this, there's St. Peter again going, explain this to me, Lord. You're talking about it. Explain this to me. He's trying to learn. He's trying to be formed. And Jesus is trying to form his disciples. Jesus is trying to teach them his kingdom. Because they're so steeped in the world, it's a process. It's like what I do with all of you on a collective basis. It's a process. I've got to get brains to think differently. I've got to get you out of the TV and radio mode. I've got to get you away from these things so that I can, at one point, form you into the disciples that Jesus needs. So now this woman comes along, and Jesus just doesn't do anything. That's key. It's his disciples that say, get rid of her. She's bothering us. She's one of them. Get rid of her. And he replies, and it's very clear, he replies to his disciples, and she overhears it. I was sent to the lost sheep. She overhears that. And then he uses an expression that's a typical expression. Now, think about last week. There was St. Peter in the boat, getting tossed about, and what does he say to Jesus as he approaches? If it's you, command me to come out to you. He didn't say, if you're the Lord, could you stop this storm? I'm in the midst of this horrible thing. Stop this. No, get out. And Peter says, fine. Because the Lord called him. He did what he was commanded. He got out of the boat and started walking on water. Shouldn't that be enough, Peter? You're walking on water. What happens? He lets the storm distract him and he sinks. This woman was in the midst of a storm. Her daughter is tormented by a demon. And when she was given something similar, well, there's a storm raging here. You're a dog. Don't come to me. What does she do? Hey, even the dogs get the scraps. Look at that faith, St. Peter. Look at this woman's faith. He had healed already in Matthew's gospel the centurion's servant, so it wasn't about her being a foreigner. It wasn't about her being outside the circle. He's teaching him again. Look at her faith. Where was yours? Where was your faith? It was, you faltered, you sunk. Why? Because you're still not getting it. You're still not hearing it. But St. Peter, God bless him, isn't going to give up. He's watching this, he's seeing this, and next week we're going to see it very clearly. Next week it's going to be very clear. Jesus is going to hit a home run. St. Peter is going to hit a home run. He's going to proclaim Jesus the Christ, and he's going to be made the first pope. Can't wait for that. That's going to be really exciting. Be on the edge of your seats between this week and next week. But read what's in between, because it's going to make a lot more sense when you hear it. For you and for me here today, a lot of the traditions that are around us, a lot of the things that have become so important to us are like the disciples. Send her away. She's a problem. She's not one of us. Send her away. Because that's what we've been steeped in. Look at the things that we think are so important today. Look at some of the stuff that's happening even within the church. I mean, so many people, I can't believe that, we had to go through this last year, but last year we got ridiculed online and besmirched by so many people in this community because we asked parents to take their kids to church. I kid you not. We asked parents to take that you're being unreasonable. It's outrageous. I can't believe you're making us do that. I'm just trying to form you. I'm just trying to get you to love Jesus Christ. That's all I want. Make Jesus more important than the soccer fields. Make Jesus more important than the dance classes. But no, we were raked over the coals publicly. I said, okay, I can handle it. Things like that. I mean, like the way things have changed so much in the last 40 and 50 and 60 years, so many people of my generation had children who were kind of on the fence with the faith, who are now had their children who are not going to church at all, who are bringing up children that they want them to have the sacraments without going to church. That has come from this reprogramming and these traditions that we see around us. And so we are the ones who are here. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your faith. Thank you for raising your family as strongly as you can in the faith. That's so important. But the families are where it's all going to change. I can make all the changes here in this parish I want to make, but if the families aren't on board, and if the families aren't praying together, and the families aren't spending time together, and the families aren't working within the family, we will do nothing here. Nothing will succeed. Nobody's finished. Not even any of you are finished. St. Peter isn't finished. It's funny, like we think St. Peter's finished on Pentecost. Remember when all of a sudden he's now preaching Jesus Christ? Think about just a couple of passages later in the Acts of the Apostles. He sees this big vision and the Lord says, slaughter and eat. And Peter again says, nothing unclean has ever gone into my mouth, Lord. Peter, haven't you got it yet? Basically, this is what I've made clean is okay. So he's still going to be formed right up until the time he's martyred. Just like all of us. We need to constantly be open, teachable. We need to be growing. We need to make more room for Jesus Christ in our life. We need to make more room for the faith in our life. And that we have to do together as brothers and sisters, as a family of Christ here and with those who are beyond these walls, of sharing that faith, of praying for each other, of being there for one another. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, this week, I'm going to ask, try to just make some family event every day that's faith-filled. Do something. Pray a family rosary. Just who's ever in the house, today we're going to sit down and just pray a rosary. Or listen to an episode of the Bible in a year, although parents, listen to some of the episodes before you let your kids listen to them, because there are a few that are R-rated. The Old Testament's got some pretty raunchy stuff in it. But that's beside the point. The catechism in a year, a wonderful thing, learn more about your faith. Do the rosary in a year with Father Mark, but have something that you as a family are tying yourselves together in Christ. That, I think, is just so incredibly important for us today. We're all still being formed. We're not finished. And if we're not engaging in the faith, if we're not growing in the faith, if we're not changing, if we're not teachable, if we're not open, then the devil's got us. And so, as the rest of this unfolds for the next 2 weeks, keep reading the sections in between and keep looking, because that gives you a clue as to what's going on. Taken by itself, this week's gospel seemed very, very out of place. But put in context, we see, no, Jesus is using this as an example This woman's faith is so great that he says to his disciples, look at her. She blows you out of the water. She blows you out of the water. And I've been blown out of the water so many times by Jesus, it's good to have once in a while. And so, be strong in your faith. Keep growing in your faith. And let the Lord touch your hearts. Let him give you his grace. For my dear brothers and sisters, we are God's family. We are his children. And we're always in that process of growing holier and better as being Christian. God love you.